Good day, everyone. Welcome to your self-help quest. I'm your host, Joshua Melissus, and joining me today is Dr. Sean Maher, who is a professor in the biology department at Missouri State University. Dr. Maher, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
Why is climate change happening?
So climate change there's anthropogenic climate change, right? And that's happening because we dump a bunch of stuff in the atmosphere, and particularly carbon products, CO2, methane, those sorts of things. And what those are doing is they're creating a warmer environment overall. This is particularly, you can see it most often in the oceans. So if you look at ocean temperatures, they're rising. And that's kind of scary because it's a big thing of water. And it takes a lot of energy to raise water temperature. So oceans, their temperatures are rising. That's influencing a lot of the weather we experience. And so the reason climate change is happening is because we're putting a bunch of carbon into the atmosphere. We're doing that either directly through production of greenhouse gases. We're also doing it through destruction of, say, forests, grassland ecosystems that would actually store carbon in other ways. So think of a tree, think of below ground biomass for grasslands like prairies, for instance. Prairies, you might see a plant that's about 3 feet tall, but below ground, it's very extensive, and that's all carbon storage. So we're dumping a bunch of carbon into the atmosphere.
Do you think things are getting worse or somewhat better?
This is tricky, right? So I think we've become a bit more. There are people that are trying to limit the amount of carbon we put in the atmosphere, but we're not doing a good enough job. Things are going to change over the next 50 years, and whether or not it's going to be really, really bad or just bad is going to depend on where you are, where you're living, and what your perspective of bad is. Some people might find that warm temperatures during the winter are okay with them, so they might perceive this differently than someone like me that says it shouldn't be this warm. We should have more snow, kind of thing.
Like, how catastrophic can things get in the future?
For some people, it's going to be totally catastrophic. They're going to lose their homes. If you think about people that live near the ocean, ocean levels are going to rise to the point where we're going to flood islands. That's already happening in some of these. I think there's a Pacific island that they're already seeing a bunch of encroachment. And so their homes are going to, these places that were above water are going to be below water. We're going to see big changes like that. So for some people, it's going to be totally gone. Other people, they might not notice a whole lot of difference.
So what kind of positive changes can we make to help the environment?
There are a lot of changes individuals can make. I think the biggest changes have to be made at a much larger, grander level in terms of actually limiting the impacts of climate change, because that's effectively where we're at right now. It's limiting the effects. It's not changing, it's not stopping, it's slowing it down, limiting it. And most of that has to come from higher level government regulations, those sorts of things, limiting carbon into the atmosphere. We can always do things as individuals, recycle, ride a bike instead of drive their car. But that's just a drop in the bucket compared to some of the other things that happen. I mean, change in diet can have a big influence because the amount of carbon used to generate certain food products is pretty excessive. So
maybe this is just because I'm ignorant on the subject, but is there like any way for like that the Earth can heal, can repair itself?
I think that's a common thought, that things will just fix themselves, and that's not always the case. So what you can get are these tipping points, in which case certain things just can't go back, right? So for instance, if you look at the Amazon rainforest, right? That's a classic example. Most people are somewhat familiar with that there are these big trees down in South America, right? And people cut them down for agriculture, right? Grow some plants, consume those plants, ranching, what have you. Well, even if you stop agriculture, it's not going to necessarily go back to that same forest structure, in part because the soil gets is influenced by that environment, becomes harder, and so the trees don't grow. So it's not going to go back to the way it was, right? And so you get these different kind of tipping points where if you wait too long, it's not going to go back. And so there is no quote unquote healing. It's going to be different.
Going off of that, there's lots of misinformation out there, and there are people who deny that climate change exists. So how do we kind of convince these people that it is a real threat to us?
I don't know. I thought about that question a bit, and I'm not really sure. I think you could try and have discussions with people, but if they don't want to believe it, they're not going to believe it, right? You can provide a ton of evidence to people about certain things that have happened or will happen, and they'll choose to ignore it. This is especially true when it comes to livelihood, that if it's going to influence their ability to, have a job, raise a family, sometimes it's convenient to ignore it. And it can be scary, right? I don't know. I don't know how to convince people that just don't want to see it.
Kind of shifting gears, I want to get, I guess, more personal here.
Mm-hmm.
But so how does, for you, how does climate change, make you feel? Do you personally, have climate change anxiety?
I've had it, for sure. So before I came to Missouri State, I was working at University of California. And part of the project was to analyze or to try to identify those climate change refugia and see if we could kind of look at how meadows might reflect that, right? And it was depressing because we'd look at data from the early part of the 20th century, and then you try to compare that to these forecasts for the end of the 21st century. And there were just certain places where you'd say, let's look at place A and compare the climate from 100 years ago to what we expect it to be in 100 years. And there'd be no places that were the same. And everything would be totally different in terms of extreme events, how warm it would be, how much water, all of these features. And it was just kind of depressing. I would look at some of these measures and then just have to go walk outside and just take a breath of fresh air and kind of just say okay, let's think this through. Or it is what it is. These are these models. Let's hope that it's not that way. But if it is, it's worthwhile for people to recognize that it is going to change dramatically. So yeah, it's stressful. I think about how people are going to survive. People are going to persist. We're going to be around. It's just going to be different.
Yeah.
And some of the things that I've gotten to see in my life, my two kids might not see those exact same things. They might see something different.
What are some of your coping strategies for dealing with that kind of anxiety?
I go outside.
Yeah.
That's how I deal with it. I go outside. I still try to interact with nature in some form or another, whether that's me going out on a run, getting exercise, doing surveys, hanging out at the field station, what have you. Going on a hike with my family, just being outside. I think that kind of helps resolve some of that stress.
Yeah.
I don't know how many other faculty you've talked to, but many of us are just stressed anyway.
Yeah.
So it's just probably another ball of stress that just sits in the corner that you just kind of ignore for a while. But yeah, I think most of the coping is coming to terms with reality and being outside and just seeing what I can see.
Do you practice any form of meditation or mindfulness?
Not in the traditional sense. I think more or less for me, if I go for a run, I feel a little bit more mentally rejuvenated. That helps me relax, kind of maybe not recenter myself, but it gives me time to think, right? And just think about whatever. And sometimes those thoughts come in, they're in there for 5 minutes and they're gone, and that works too. So, but I don't do kind of the, other types of traditional meditation, I guess.
Do you go on a run every day?
I do not. I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
So, but a few times a week, I try to go about 3 times a week, and then I walk to campus. I live close enough to campus that I walk or ride my bike, and that affords some time of just kind of a self moment of getting someplace, kind of think about the day, kind of plan for the next 20 minutes, that sort of stuff kind of helps.
On average, how often do you spend time out in nature?
Less than I'd like. I think a lot of people who get into ecology and wildlife biology really like being outside and want to do those sorts of things. And I think one of the outcomes, though, of doing research is that you spend, and having an academic career, is you end up spending a lot of time in an office away from it. So over the summer, I get to spend a bit more time. I've been really fortunate the last couple of years where we've been able to do some surveys in nearby prairies, and so that gets me out. I'm now director of the field station, so I'll be down there a bit more often doing surveys, looking for stuff, as it were. But yeah, if I could get out more, I would, but I can't.
Joe Rogan is kind of a controversial podcaster, and because I know he's brought on people who've had misinformation about vaccines and climate change, and I guess what is kind of the danger with that?
It gives people the wrong impression about how science is done. In part, when you bring in someone who's not really an expert about the procedures to do, say, model estimation, but then commenting on them is just going to be problematic, especially if they don't have expertise in some of the complex systems involved in, say, atmospheric science. I am a user of models of atmospheric change. I don't pretend to understand all the details to generate those models. And so I won't comment that say, okay, yeah, this one's so much better than that one because it's fit differently, whatever. I'll evaluate what they tell me in the best way possible. But I think having someone say that atmospheric models are too simple because it's more complex, don't understand the difficulty in fitting statistical models anyway, or why we want simple models. Because if we can explain a lot of variability with a simple model, we don't need that level of complexity. And that level of complexity, something overly complex, we can't actually apply it to new concepts easily because it's too, in statistics we talk about things that are overfit, that it's just focused on the observed data. And so to make extrapolations on that becomes problematic. So when we think about climate science and atmospheric science, simple models, or the models are simpler than reality, but that's true for everything, and that's okay. It's okay. I think one thing to think about, it's okay to be wrong. I just talked about that in statistics today, or this last week, is that we're uncertain, we're wrong. It's just that we don't want to be very wrong. We want to be as close to not wrong as possible, but we're going to be wrong because there's uncertainty, there's unknown, there's randomization in the world. And things don't behave the way you always expect them to.
When educating future generations about the things to come, what do science teachers have to do more, I guess, to educate their students about climate change?
I think one place we really need to look about climate change and how things have changed is you could look at the paleo record. So look at what was going on 20,000, 30,000 years ago. What that tells you is that places that we see today were very different. Put it in context then, the amount of change that happened between 20,000 years ago and now, we're accelerating that change. And so the idea that, I think I said earlier that, nature's going to persist, it's just not going to be the same. It's because of this rapid change. That the things that happened 20,000 years ago, yeah, climate changes, but we're accelerating a lot of that warming. We're beyond levels that have been seen, or we're beyond carbon levels in the atmosphere that have been seen in millions of years. And so things are going to shift more. And I think putting it in context of just say, we know the La Brea tar pits, that's kind of a classic example, or even the movie Ice Age, and you kind of say, oh yeah, that stuff was happening. But it's going to be a lot different, and things are going to accelerate. And I think if people want to teach students about climate change and kind of nature's reaction to that, you can put it in context of this is what happened, we saw change, it's actually going faster, right? So you walk on a treadmill at 2 miles an hour and then jump it up to 70 miles an hour. That's what we're experiencing.
As for environmentalism, what is something to look forward to in the future?
I don't know. Environmentalism is very much a philosophy of supporting the environment, preserving the environment. It doesn't necessarily always follow that. It doesn't always have a sustainability angle, right, in terms of human use. And so I think we need to emphasize true sustainability in terms of food resources, right, where people are going to live, and come to terms that we can't keep behaving like it's not changing, right? Embrace science as best we can, and go with that. That's clearly a challenge when we can't get lots of people to embrace science now, even though that would prevent us from wearing masks at this stage, right? Like I am vaccinated and boosted, but if you look at the data for where we live, that's not broad, right? We're still below 60% vaccinated for the Springfield area, Greene County, at least last I checked. So it's kind of, sometimes it makes me, think about mental health, and kind of, it makes me sad, because if we can't get people, if you can't convince someone to do something for their neighbor, why are they going to behave differently in the long term, right? And this is kind of an immediate thing. Like, you could save the life of someone, and people are just making it a political statement to not save someone's life, not prevent illness in someone, right? But then we're going to ask them to, drive their car less. They're probably not going to do that. And that makes me sad, because I want to think that most people would be willing to help somebody else out, but that's not necessarily what's happening. Yeah. They want to make it a political statement about not getting a vaccine, or they want to believe some podcaster and not the public health, the scientists that have evaluated these things.
And I guess this is just me, but I guess I kind of blame more of the politicians as opposed to the people, because I know there are lots of politicians out there that are good manipulators, and good at taking certain issues and then politicizing it. Mm-hmm. And it's sad, because I guess some people look up to those politicians and they see it as fact.
Mm-hmm. But those politicians themselves have gotten vaccinated and boosted, right?
So some of them
they're just lying to people,
yeah,
or doing something, right? And the flip side of that is that those people are buying it. They want to hear some of those things, right? That's what they want to hear, and they're being told what they want to hear, and not what the truth is, right? And so they presumably want to be ignorant about something. They want something else to be true rather than what is true. And there isn't somebody going to track you because you got the vaccine. But that's what some people think.
Yeah.
Because that's what some people said.
And that's just like the saddest thing, because a lot of people just bury their heads into the sand, and I think what people need to realize is that once you face the hard truth, and even if it's a truth that you don't really want to accept, if you get around to accepting it, I think it can be difficult at first, but then once you accept it, then it can become easier to deal with.
Sure.
At least from my perspective. I kind of had an existential crisis a few years ago, in terms of death and my own mortality, and I was just terrified of the idea of dying. But once I faced that, once I just thought about it more, I kind of accepted it, and it was hard at first, but then once I accepted it more on a daily basis, I don't really have that fear anymore.
Right. But that's part of being human, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what makes us special, is that we know death is coming, right? And we can make decisions about what we do between now and death to some degree. We don't actually know particularly when it's going to happen. But yeah, and I think some people are just like, well, it's not going to bother me when it comes to climate change. And they're going to put their head in the sand.
And climate change, it's kind of like death in that sense, too, because it's like a thing that you can't really predict.
Well, right. You can kind of say that this stuff's going to, the thing that it gets confusing to some degree, right, is that we can't pinpoint exactly how your experience is going to change, right? Because when we talk about climate, we're talking about long periods of time. When we talk about weather, we're talking about yesterday, right? And so weather patterns, people will throw out, there was the guy that threw the snowball in Congress. It's like, oh, climate change, I still got snow. Well, he was missing the point, right? We're still going to have snow in parts of the United States. It's not like it's all going to go away. It's just that certain weather patterns are going to shift. You're going to get more extreme events, more extreme rainfall in certain areas. In some of the mountainous regions, it's going to shift from snow to rain. So they're going to have the same amount of precipitation, but it's going to come down differently, which is going to influence everybody in Los Angeles, San Francisco, where they get their water, right? But I think that's less tangible for some people right now because it's not happening immediately, and it won't happen for another 20, 30 years. And they're not thinking that far ahead because maybe we'll find some sci-fi solution or whatnot.
What were some of the, I guess, the worst disasters from last year that you saw that definitely had a big impact on the environment?
Recently, there was a tornado in Kentucky, right? I think that was I can't remember big tornadoes in Kentucky before. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, there was the tornado in Joplin that ripped through, basically destroyed a whole town, a small city. We've got plenty of these the hurricanes that have hit over the last 3-4 years that have shifted how people have to live and where people live. We've got displacement. I just saw, people are still struggling with some of the Hurricane Katrina things. That hasn't resolved itself, and I can't remember how long ago that was. We've got the wildfires, right? That's really striking. I think that was one of the big stories of the fall was the wildfires out west. That's in part because it's been dry. They've had droughts. The management practices have been such that that have kind of facilitated some of those things. The power grids, the actual structure of those are old and not up to date as they could be. We had our big ice storm last year, about 52 weeks ago, right? And when that hit Texas, they were totally unprepared, right? Because the grid wasn't ready for it. And so when we think about climate readiness in the future, there's a whole bunch of this infrastructure that needs to be fixed and adjusted. Not just, the roads and things. It's, the electrical grid. Where do we generate electricity, and how does that come from? And I think things like those wildfires, some of them, there was one in California that was sparked in part, I think, by some of the generators. That wasn't this most recent one. That was one while ago. But, wildfires, ice storms, those highlight that we're not ready for some of these big changes.
Is it just like a change in the like the way things are run that needs to change to get people ready for that?
I think there just has to be, people have to think of things differently. We have to invest wisely. We can't worry about making so much money in some cases. I've taught population ecology, where we talk about population growth. And when people start talking about you got to increase growth, that means things are growing faster and faster and faster. And that doesn't, from a biological standpoint, that's not sustainable. But that's kind of the underlying principles that we hear a lot about. Is our economy growing? Is it growing faster than before? Rather than it's just growing. That means it has a positive growth. That's what we want, right? But to make it accelerate, it becomes less sustainable. You need more resources for those sorts of things. So I guess my take is that you have to have a different point of view and have everybody willing to accept that point of view. And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge when you start saying you can't have that. And I think in our culture, that is not something people want to hear.
I guess this is kind of a positive, but when you say that there's at least more awareness of climate change.
Yeah, I'd say there is. I think there's awareness to it. I don't think it's always been treated well, though, right? Because sometimes it's treated in a mocking way.
Yeah.
Right? And that doesn't help anything. But I think there's a lot of people that are aware of it. We have some of these kind of stopgap things that we try to do as individuals, but it's not changing anything. It's not changing stuff fast enough. I remember acid rain was a problem, right? And legislatures made changes. And then we didn't have to worry about acid rain for a while. Those things could be done. People don't want to do them right now.
I guess I don't know what the best solution for that is, just with ignorant politicians, because the thing is that they're always going to play that up for however long that they're in charge.
Yeah, I don't know.
So I guess the best thing that we can do is just try to vote them out, or...
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
It's
a struggle.
It's a struggle. I mean, you don't know why certain people do certain things. You can kind of guess why. But the lack of action on certain angles, you're just...
I mean, I think it's mostly money is probably the motivation.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of it.
Yeah.
There's money to be made, right?
But it can't save you in the end.
No, it can't. And it can't, it might help your generations in the future, but they still might exhibit, your grandkids and great-grandkids might have to deal with a lot of more extreme things than you never even considered. I wish we could just get some of this stuff done, but it doesn't seem like a lot of people, well, I should say, it doesn't seem like enough people want to get it done. So you do what you can, right? You do the actions locally, and try to make where you live a better place, and a safer place, as it were, and hope that other people do the same thing.
I feel like some people think, when it comes to environmentalism and dealing with climate change, that they think it's going to cost them something. But actually, it's kind of like the reverse. Like, if you take certain measures, you can actually spend less money.
Yeah. your grocery bill could go down if you have. I think that was one of the things that people noted in terms of shutdown and the COVID shutdowns and things, is that people started growing vegetables in their backyard. And that's a good thing, right? We had victory gardens in World War II in the United States, right? Because you couldn't get fruit and fresh vegetables. So you had victory gardens. It's things like that. Like, if you can do it, do it. A lot of times it tastes better when it's right out you can eat the tomato right off the plant. So, but yeah, you can save some money doing it that way. Won't necessarily make any money.
Yeah.
You can save some money.
And even with other things like riding a bike, as opposed to spending a lot of money on a truck, for instance.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We have 2 gas-powered vehicles. Another thing is, make sure you take care of those vehicles, right? If you take care of those vehicles, you don't have to buy a new vehicle, right? Because that's expensive in terms of carbon production and things like that. So we have a Subaru Forester, and we've got a 2002 Volkswagen Golf that I've been driving since grad school, and it still runs. It's manual transmission. I get to take it out once a week and drive it to the grocery store and whatnot. But I walk and I ride my bike everywhere. Public transit is a fantastic way to kind of reduce your carbon footprint. I recognize not everybody has that luxury, right? And not all cities and towns are set up for that. I can go easily a week without a car in Springfield. If I had to do a couple months, it'd be pretty tough because of getting lots of groceries and that sort of stuff. It'd be more difficult. I'd do it. It'd just be more difficult. And if you're a single parent, it's really, really hard.
So I think there's like some small, like little changes, I think, today that are happening that increase more awareness of sustainability.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just trying to think of like another like, I guess, thing that is kind of that was common back then, but it's not used as often now because it was bad for the environment.
Styrofoam.
Styrofoam?
Yeah. So I remember when you would get a sandwich. There was this ad campaign at McDonald's. I can't remember what maybe it was I think it was McDonald's, but they had a styrofoam container. So the hot part of the burger was on one side and the cold part of the burger was on the other. And then you folded it together and you got they don't do that. Now it's paper / with a little plastic. So styrofoam, that used to be really common when you went to a fast food joint, and everything was in styrofoam. And it's not that way because, do you remember the ozone layer, the hole in the ozone?
Yeah. Right?
That was like this catastrophic thing when I was a kid, and that it was getting bigger, and CFCs and all that kind of stuff. And we did away with those things, and the ozone layer got smaller. The ozone hole got smaller. It's still there, but it got smaller. We can do things. We can act. We can make changes. Yeah. We just have to choose to do it.
Whether they're genuine or not, I know like some companies try to like advocate for better sustainability, and I know like some, like going off of that, because you mentioned the McDonald's and styrofoam. What was it? I think it was Starbucks. They eliminated the use of straws.
Yeah. That was kind of the weird reaction to a sea turtle, I think it was, and straws. And suddenly everybody got away with stop using straws. Great.
Yeah. I guess it's funny that I didn't know about the turtle, but I think that brings up another good point, is that as humans, pathos really works for us.
Uh-huh.
Like the emotional appeal to pretty much anything, it's a good motivator, because like if we see like an ad for something and it's like really sad, it makes us sad. I mean, it makes us sad and it makes us angry to where we want to act, and we want to help in any way we can.
Yeah, it's true.
And I think that also works for increasing more awareness for climate change.
Yeah.
Is having more, I guess, ads or that that kind of bring that emotional reaction out of us.
Yeah, and I think I've seen images of like there was this pseudo-starving polar bear image that was kind of brought. I don't know if you saw it. I saw it a year ago or something. Like, oh yeah, this is going to be the reality. Polar bears are going to starve to death. And it didn't, push the needle for some people, but not others. So I think you're right.
As humans, we can definitely be selfish, and I think also, I guess we could have arguments or like ads that kind of puts it in their perspective, to where they're not only to where they can they have to do this because they have to do this for themselves or for people that they care about.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what you want, right? Make action on things, but that's not always what people do either, right? Because like you said, they're selfish.
Yeah.
So we're inherently selfish. I'll say this is anytime I talk about climate change, it always feels like a downer.
Yeah. I mean, it is, but it's also just a good thing to talk about it because this is being a self-help podcast, is that we have to be able to talk about difficult subjects because like I said earlier, like you don't want to bury your head into the sand. We have to we have to talk about these problems in order to confront it and to make change.
Yeah.
And that's how you do better.
Yeah.
As a person and also just bettering society.
Sure. Yeah. I agree.
Okay, I got two last questions for you,
Uh-huh.
and these are questions that I ask everyone.
Mm-hmm.
What is something that has brought you joy today?
I have two daughters. They're 5 and 2, and every day there's something that makes me smile.
What's something that you need to work on?
Focus. I think I have to do a better job focusing on things. I think that's something I've struggled with my entire adult life. It's like, I know I need to get this thing done, but this thing's really cool, so I'm going to mess with this instead, right? And I think we can all relate to that to some degree. I know some people have a much more a bigger struggle with that than probably I do, but it's always something I try to work on, of just like try to get these things done.
Thank you so much for being here. I really
no problem.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
And to our audience, thank you so much for watching and listening. And for more content, of course, please subscribe to Your Self-Help Quest on Apple and Spotify as well as YouTube. And I hope you all have a very beautiful day, and make sure to take care of yourselves. Peace.